Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online Conversation 2021 Festival Edition. Please join me, Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director, and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, in conversation with Catherine Tatge and Dominique Lasseur. They are the producers and filmmakers behind the Civic Life Project and will tell us about the two films that will be a part of the Free for All Shorts program called Muted and Walking Alone. To find out information about all of our programs, please go to the Global Peace Film Festival website, peacefilmfest.org. And remember, the in-person programming begins September 21st through the 26th, and all of our online programming begins September 27th, ending October 3rd. And now let's welcome Catherine and Dominique. Thank you for being with us today.
It's nice to be with you.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, Catherine and Dominique. It's so good to see you. So let's start. First of all, tell us about the Civic Life Project, and then describe the two films that we've selected for the Free for All Shorts, and tell us a little bit about the directors of those films.
Well, I'll start to tell you a little bit about the Civic Life Project. We are actually producers who've done most of our work for public television, primetime public television. We've done a lot of work with Bill Moyers, and the project Civic Life Project was born out of a project that we were going to do for public television about democracy, a series about democracy. And in the process of researching the series, we realized that the people we really wanted to address and engage in the conversation about democracy were young people who seem to be the most alienated from our political system, not voting, not participating in any sort of democratic proceedings. And we realized that the way to engage them was not to make a series for PBS, but to have them make short films. And so that's how the Civic Life Project came about, is that we have students who make short films about issues of interest to them. And by doing so, they connect to their community. And the culmination is a presentation of their film to community members and conversation about the subject that they chose to explore.
So the two films that were selected, Muted and Walking Alone, were two films that were done by Lawrence University students. And the history of that is that I was asked to put together the film program at Lawrence University. And while I was we were building a studio and doing all that work, we decided it would be a great idea to see how Civic Life worked with college students. And it was an incredible experience. We had about 15 students that we broke up in groups. And we started with having them research the community of Appleton, Wisconsin, where Lawrence lives. And the students then researched, trying to find out what exactly were some of the big issues in the town. One group of students decided that it was really important. They felt that they really needed to deal with the whole LGBTQ situation, because a lot of gay students who walked in town were harassed, called names, and even on the college campus. And they wanted to really talk about that experience. And Muted was a pretty unexpected discovery. The students found out in their research that Appleton, Wisconsin, which looks like a really safe town and everything looks sort of perfect. It's a Midwestern
perfect
town. Had the third largest sex trafficking situation in the city of Appleton.
In Wisconsin.
I mean, in Wisconsin. And the people who were trafficked, the young women who were trafficked were not what everyone thinks about is, they're minority groups and all that kind of, these are Midwestern girls and boys. And they had homes within the town where these girls lived. and they discovered this story, and they were very lucky to be able to find one of those young women who was willing to talk about it. She had fortunately gone to church, because they live lives that are very normal and people don't expect things to happen. And they go to church, and one woman looked at this young woman and sort of said, something's up with this girl, gave her her card. And so she was able to get out of the situation. And so that's her story. And what happened is that we then, part of the project with Civic Life is not only creating the film, but then actually having those films presented in community. So when Muted and Walking Alone were shown for an audience of about 500 people at the Fox Valley Technical College, we wanted to sort of break the town and gown situation. And the townspeople of Appleton were shocked. And they're a very kind of interesting culture, because they really take action. And so these two films actually caused the town to change policy in how they were dealing with sex trafficked girls and what they could do to improve the LGBTQ community. So that's what the story is on those two films.
Well, if I could draw out just a little bit more, listening to you both answer that initial question, when, usually we are talking to the director of a film, and so we will ask about their artistic approach. But in this case, it seems as if the approach of the organization is really critical to understanding this project and how these films came into being. Could you talk just a little bit more about that intentionality?
I think that a great part of the intentionality was to make students understand. It was not a film course per se. It was really a sort of, how to be a good, engaged, and interested citizen. Empathy is really something that we care about and that we wanted to convey to the students. And so for students to relate to people who have vastly different experiences than they do, certainly in the case of sex trafficking, for LGBT, similar experiences, but still people that come from different horizons, etc. The most important thing was empathy. And so the technicality and the editing, etc., were part of the teaching, but really it's how to relate to another individual that was the most critical mission in a way.
We spent a lot of time teaching the students how to ask good questions, open-ended questions, how to listen deeply, and how to connect with people, because a lot of young people are not comfortable interviewing people. And so they had to get used to that. So we spent a lot of time with that. And all the students, none of them had film backgrounds. They were biology students. They were kids from different disciplines. And so they didn't have a kind of preconceived notion about how to approach a film. And this way we were able to really mentor them through our process.
Well, when you talk about having a preconceived notion, it is almost impossible to approach any task, really, no matter how simple or complex, without at least bringing some kind of set of expectations. But then there are surprises and things that are learned along the way. Could you talk a little bit about maybe the things that from the Civic Project, the Civic Life Project, what you learned, but also what you had heard the students themselves learn and what were surprises to them?
Well, it's one of the first things we tell them is that the most beautiful thing about documentary filmmaking is actually the surprises, because you do always go into a situation where you have a very specific idea of what the thing is. And for instance, we did a documentary about domestic violence many, many years ago. And it was a commission in a way, or it was funded by the Mary Kay cosmetic foundations. And, when we first heard about it, our reaction was, well, yes, domestic violence. It's an issue of women who are inner city and victimized, and it's a mystery of why they don't leave. And we realized that that was one of the most offensive questions that you can ask. Why don't you leave? And you realize, making the project, that we met some of the most courageous women we could imagine, and that the reason they were not leaving was to protect their kids, to protect themselves, etc. I think that the kids had this experience. I remember students making an experience about marijuana users, medical marijuana users in Connecticut who had been imprisoned, whereas actually they really were dependent, their health was dependent on using marijuana. And, the kids thought, well, people who use marijuana, of course, and they realized that it was a deep, deep, very profound issue of health. And I remember the student, writing her paper for application to college, and she mentioned that experience, saying, I would never have thought what we found out.
And I would like to return, Catherine, to something that you had mentioned in your first answer about the impact of these films and of this project, because impact is certainly at the center of the Global Peace Film Festival mission. The reason we curate the films and other artworks are to introduce points of inspiration, stories, models, so that people watching can take those back into their own lives and communities to make the world a more just and place. And certainly we have been making the connections as long as Nina and I have been involved together with this festival, about democracy and civic life, as thinking about that as a framework for peace. And so I'd love if you could, talk a bit more about your own conceptions of that.
Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think if peace is to exist, it will come from a great feeling of empathy and being able to understand the other, and the other can be really different. I mean, we had the experience of interviewing white supremacists, for instance, or gang members in LA, whose experience was so remote from our comfortable Upper West Side experience. And yet there were moments where you realize that you actually felt the same way. I mean, not sure I want to go into details, but after an interview with a white supremacist, for instance, he turned to Catherine and I and said, well, I have to leave. And, we hadn't struck down the equipment. We said, well, are you sure? And he said, yes, yeah, you can just close the door when you leave. And this guy had, for an hour and a half, said the most despicable things about race, things that were at the opposite of what, we ever could believe or conceive, etc. And he said, well, I have to leave because my wife is dying of pancreatic cancer. And she's at the hospital, and I want to spend as much time as I can with her. And at that point, my father had just passed away 3 months before. And that man, who was just a despicable human being 5 minutes before, we had this connection that we could not prevent from surfacing. So that's, I think that's a key to peace, when you see the other not as the enemy, but as someone you can relate, somewhere.
Yeah, I think with the students and the work and the process of getting to know community members and interviewing community members, I think a lot of their thinking shifted in terms of their sort of preconceived notions about other people. And so I think that that somehow the process of making these kind of films where you have to look at two sides, the different sides of an issue. That's part of the democratic process. Let's face it, we never have a right and wrong. It's all shades of gray. And what the students come out is an understanding of the gray areas, that there are no perfect solutions to these problems. It's a matter of compromise. It's a matter of finding some way of making connections. So that's what I would say.
There's another example that I have to give on democracy and connection. We worked with a school in Stamford, Connecticut, which was a last chance school, where kids had been thrown out from everywhere else. And actually a number of students had problem with the law, etc. And because the Stamford Academy, they wore a uniform and they were singled out by the police, or they felt that they were singled out by the police because they had a reputation of coming from a tough school. And so when we asked them, what do you want to make a film about? They said, we want to make a film about that, about the police in Stamford. And it ended up that they did interview 2 police officers, one white, one black. And that moment of connection on both sides, the police officers realizing the amount of work that the kids had made to prepare for the interview and to set the interviews, etc. And for the kids to realize that those 2 police officers had actually been their age, had actually been in trouble, and had a similar experience. And those moments are precious. And I think it's by setting up those dialogues that we'll succeed in making peace and making our democracy work better.
So how can people watching this support the Civic Life Project?
That's very easy. You go to civiclifeproject.org, you pull out your credit card, and you make a donation. Or you contact us in any way if you're interested in bringing the project to your school, to your community. And we're happy to answer any and all answers. We also love it when we're followed on our social media, because that becomes a critical part of how you get known and how you connect in this world.
Also, I just want to add that we have every year we have a youth film challenge, and this for 2022 we will have a challenge right before the elections where young people between the ages of 15 and 25 can create a 6-minute documentary on some issue that they really care about. And this is a competition. So we love to have young people make films about these issues, or social media pieces, which are pieces that encourage their colleagues, their other young people to vote, to get out there and vote. And
we have about $20,000 in cash prizes that we distribute. So that's usually make kids pretty happy.
Well, that's all terrific. So finally, what's next for the Civic Life Project beside, in addition to that, like sort of globally for the Civic Life Project? And what's next for you to, is there any, are you doing any films yourselves?
Well, what's next is what we're really focusing on is trying to get the Youth Film Challenge on a more national, global scale. So we're ultimately hoping that this becomes really a larger organization that can support the voices of young people. The fact that how important it is to really support the new leadership, because we, to a certain degree, have sort of decided that we want to spend our time mentoring young people because we feel that we have a responsibility to help them solve the problems of this world. And
as a generation, we've left them with such a mess that we feel we need to help them, giving some tools to fix what we've left for them.
So that's really our focus. I mean, we do a lot of teaching. We do a lot of mentoring, and then we do the challenge. That's really our focus right now, because we're very concerned about the future of our country and what's happening in the world.
Well, thank you, Catherine and Dominique, for sharing that all of your insights behind the Civic Life Project. And I would definitely encourage everyone who has listened to this interview to go to civiclifeproject.org and to follow the Civic Life Project on their social media channels. And we will, Nina and I will definitely be following the progress of the 2022 Film Challenge. So we will stay in touch with you regarding that. But in the meantime, for anyone who has listened to this interview and would like to actually see two of the films that are representative of the mentoring work that Catherine and Dominique are doing through Civic Life Project, please go to peacefilmfest.org beginning September 27th and running through October the 3rd, and look for the Free for All shorts, and you will find Muted and Walking Alone available to stream on our website during that period. You can find out information about all of our other activities also on peacefilmfest.org. Thank you again for watching this glow, and we will see you again soon.